Today's Locked On Bucks, we take a look ahead to tonight's game that we think is going to be played and share what appears to be some very good news for a large portion of Bucks fans. We'll get into that coming up after this on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined as always by Camille Davis. We thank you for making this your first listen of the day and for checking out the Locked On Bucks newsletter. You can still sign up for free at lockedondaily.com, and your day started with the all-new free Locked On Bucks newsletter. Today's episode is sponsored by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. I think most of this show is going to be dedicated to the latter here, Camille, and that good news. But we have to start with tonight. As of this moment, the Bucks are still scheduled to play a game against the Miami Heat in Rivals Week at Fiserv Forum. They are still in New Orleans as we record this 8 o'clock on Thursday morning. They are still in New Orleans. I have there's the reports out there from a few sources saying 4 o'clock. I heard from multiple people yesterday we're probably going to arrive in Milwaukee sometime between noon and 2, which even upon hearing that, you think, man, that is and I talked about it a little bit yesterday too, but keep in mind, I think they did something light Monday morning, but other than that, they have not done anything other than play a game since Sunday night. So there's that aspect to it. There's the fact that 2 o'clock arrival is, players are going to start getting to the arena for a 6:30 tip, 4 o'clock, 3:30, somewhere in that window. So it's already cutting it close if that's the landing date. And now the reports of, hey, it's actually closer to 4. It could be 4 o'clock. Coach availability for a 6 o'clock tip, Camille, is 4:45 for the home coach, 5 o'clock for the road coach. So if it's a 4 o'clock arrival, we're talking about a scenario where you leave the airport, come directly to the arena, and, okay, I got 15 minutes to get set for my press conference.
I feel like if this wasn't a nationally televised game, that they might have already said, let's just postpone this. But given the fact that it is on TNT, they're trying their hardest to make sure that this game continues on as scheduled. But you just pointed out just how close of a time gap that is and how much time it would need for, guys to get to the arena. Coach availability is at 4:45. You mentioned that these guys haven't even really been able to hoop like that since this weekend. And now it's like, okay, now you come on this flight, you get in late, and now you have to go to the arena, warm up, and then just play a game as if nothing else has happened. Like, we've heard of teams having to play through some weird flights and, lack of sleep and just feeling a little bit not necessarily the freshest as possible or most prepared. So you've seen it happen in the league before. It wouldn't be a first time thing, but this would be cutting it really close, especially if that flight lands towards that later time around 4 p.m. Like, it feels to me, if they land that late, this might be another game that's postponed for the Bucks. Although your show yesterday that you did, which I thought was fantastic, just bringing up the point of the Bucks have played the second fewest amount of games through the first half of the season. And if you have 2 games to now make up when you already had a heavy back half of the schedule, it's going to really test these veteran legs going forward. So it feels like a kind of a no-win situation for the Bucks here, because either you're going to get off this plane and play a game off of very limited preparation, limited rest, or you're going to have to get this game postponed and add another game to the back half of a very game-heavy schedule.
Yeah, I mean, when the Miami Heat arrived in Milwaukee, you felt too like, they're doing everything they can to play this. Like, you're not gonna. All right, sorry for the inconvenience, Heat. Right. We're postponing this game. And to your point too about if this wasn't a TNT game, because look, a lot goes into that. We can scoff at it and say, well, what difference does that make? Well, you have your TNT truck and equipment and your crew that you would have to get somewhere else. Like, they would have had to make this call at least a day ago, maybe 2 days ago, because it's not as if it's just New Orleans that's being impacted by weather right now. So you'd have to move that. You'd have to look at the schedule and see, okay, what else do we have that can tip in that early window on TNT? There's only one other 6:30 tip. That's the Atlanta Hawks and Toronto Raptors. I don't know. That's a great national matchup that you're putting out there to the audience. 6 o'clock tip in Orlando for the Magic, who are, really going through it right now. And the Portland Trailblazers, again, not a great option there. So that's what complicates it even more. And look, even the option of, okay, so what? Then you just go dark for that first game? Well, then there's going to be a reworking of, hey, we paid for this. And especially the broadcast partner that is exiting too, they are going to get everything that they can. So that's, I think, why there's been no movement, even if this is a scenario of like the only way this is postponed is if the Bucks are literally arriving in Milwaukee at like 5:30 or 6. Then it's like, okay, we can't do this. But yes, it is made for an interesting couple of days here. And the last thing to say on this before we move on to what's going to take up a bulk of this show is that schedule component. So again, it's as of this moment just one game that you have to reschedule, but you would look to places where you have 2 days off in between games and you can squeeze in, and now all of a sudden becomes 3 games in 4 days and a back-to-back there. But unfortunately for the Bucks, they only have 3 of those left because of the volume of games they have left. None of them line up with off days for the New Orleans Pelicans, or it would set up a scenario of back-to-back for the Pelicans, which you of course can't do. So there's going to be at least 2 changes to the schedule for the Bucks at some point here. It's going to be similar to what we saw. I think the Hawks did that with their snowstorm, where it was the team that you're playing have to make it up against is playing on, let's say, a Tuesday, Wednesday, or I really butchered that. They're playing on a Wednesday and you're off around there. So it would just become, all right, we're going to bump their game to Tuesday. You're then flying into that city and you're playing a back-to-back. You both are. So that's really the only clean way around this. So it's not going to be easy to find that makeup game here for the Bucks and the Pelicans. And we've obviously seen the COVID year where not every team played 82 games. And even I want to say the year after, because like we haven't had to deal with postponed games since 2021 and 2020. I want to say in the years that followed, when we had health and safety protocols, there was at least one team that when it got to the end of the season, they just did not make up one of the games because it was going to be insignificant. But it's probably going to be significant for the Bucks, long and short of it is when we talk about tiebreakers. So that's where we're at. As of this moment, the game is being played tonight, and we'll see. We'll see what version of the Bucks are on the floor. We know the Miami Heat will not have Jimmy Butler. That leads us into the other big talking point, because the Heat are a team that's been in the news. The Phoenix Suns have been in the news. The Bucks got dragged into that news as well. But we did receive, I don't want to say clarification, but I think good news for certainly every viewer of yesterday's show and most Bucks fans that are out there. So we will get into the latest on the mega team, multi-team trade coming up after this on Locked On Bucks. Therapy is a game changer. It can help manage stress, improve sleep, and communicate more effectively. But finding the right therapist and fitting sessions into a busy schedule can be a challenge. That's where Talkspace comes in. Talkspace is the leading virtual therapy provider. It makes getting you the help you need easy, accessible, and affordable. With Talkspace, signing up is simple. You can match with a licensed therapist who fits your needs, usually within 48 hours. And it's convenient. You can have sessions from the comfort of your home and even message your therapist between appointments. Plus, Talkspace is covered by many insurance plans. And for most insured members, there's a $0 copay. It's never been easier to prioritize mental health. As a listener of this podcast, you'll get $80 off your first month with Talkspace when you go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnNBA and enter promo code SPACE80. to match with a licensed therapist today. Go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnNBA and enter the code SPACE80 to get $80 off your first month and show your support for the show. That's Talkspace.com/LockedOnNBA, promo code SPACE80. All right, Camille, we did a show, to basically touch on the latest of the weather in New Orleans, but primarily to jump in on all of the Bradley Beal talk that have been going on since it really started to intensify. There was the report yesterday from Chris Haynes saying, hey, the Bucks are out. They were never in on Bradley Beal. They've never gone down that path and had those exploratory talks. And I was telling you last night when we were talking, I was exchanging DMs with Bobby Marks, and it started with me trying to figure out what is the prorated amount for a veteran minimum. So if the Bucks make some type of multi-team deal and do like a 3-for-1 or a 4-for-1, you got to sign minimum contracts. So at this point in the season, I would assume it's prorated. What is the figure if you sign somebody on, say, a March 1st? So we had a few correspondences there, and then eventually he just messaged back and said, like, look, there is no scenario where Bradley Beal is going to end up in Milwaukee. I do not see any scenario that exists for Bradley Beal in Milwaukee. And that kind of cut things off there. And it's like, oh, okay, interesting. He sent me that at like 4:00. And we saw the reports or the Chris Haynes video and more of that start to circulate later on at night. So if only I would have been paying closer attention to the timestamps, could have taken that from Bobby and run with it. But nonetheless, it seems like this is beyond good news for most fans that were in the chat yesterday. I think most fans that are in the chat today as well. And I think, Camille, in talking off the air for you.
Yeah, listen, if I was on the show with you yesterday and we were broaching the trade conversations, the rumors around Bradley Beal to Milwaukee, my tone would have been a little bit different, Justin, because the Bradley Beal to Milwaukee made no sense to me whatsoever. I have never seen the Bucks fan base so unified as I saw with the Bradley Beal trade rumors. Maybe the last time I saw the Bucks this unified, Bucks fans, was Game 6, the finals run, when it was like, Milwaukee, we're here, we're coming out for the team. But it was just like everyone saw this for the most part of being like, why would the Bucks do this? There have been many conversations around the health of Khris Middleton, what he's going to be able to do this year, given that he's coming off the double ankle surgery. And there are people still saying, yeah, I still want Middleton over Bradley Beal. And we made a joke of like, hey, maybe this is what it took for fans to kind of appreciate what Khris Middleton brings to the table a little bit as well. But all in all, I'm really glad that Chris Haynes came out and just said like, hey, the Bucks really don't have interest in Bradley Beal, because again, it just didn't make sense to me. I didn't understand what the Bucks would be looking to accomplish by replacing Khris Middleton with Bradley Beal, and like, what can Bradley Beal really give you that you're looking for that you feel Khris can't provide? And is it worth it, especially with the contract that you have to take on after this year and the year after that as well, with how much money that Bradley Beal makes, north of $50 million for the next 3 seasons. So it just didn't make sense to me at all. And I'm hoping that Chris Haynes report is the truth, in the sense that if the Bucks are involved in this Jimmy Butler business, they're going to be one of those teams that's just looking to dump a guy here, try to get some salary. You don't necessarily need to bring back Jimmy Butler or Bradley Beal in the process.
The biggest thing, and I talked about it on yesterday's show too. I mean, these episodes are not the easiest for me to do, given that I obviously have to be extremely careful about what I say is my job with the team, but also what I've tried to tell other people too, because we're all critical of players. The tricky part, and it's not just for me, it's for anybody that has aspirations to do anything here, is I can't really come out and say, well, this guy sucks and this guy can't shoot that way, because like, number one, you got to use the numbers to back up and use the story, use numbers for the story that you're telling. But also for me, and maybe you think it's me not being candid, I'll say as much as I can, but I can't say this guy's terrible. I don't want this guy on my team. This guy's, terrible at this. This guy sucks. Because what happens 2 years later when he signs with the Bucks or he's traded to the Bucks? And then there's that awkward conversation. So I can tell you what I'm seeing. I can tell you by the numbers, it would indicate this. And that's where I was kind of in the middle on the Bradley Beal thing. Like, I get all the questions that are out there defensively. It hasn't certainly looked great in Phoenix on that end of the floor. I do think Bradley Beal and a player like Bradley Beal would be a fit on an offense with Giannis and Damian Lillard, because he'd be magnifying the mid-range offense, like more of what Khris Middleton does, more volume of that. But to me, it never made sense unless there was some other asset going to the Bucks. And, people like, well, get a minimum contract. Can't really do that for what we talked about before of you got to shed $6 million basically to duck that second apron. So the only way this made sense and why I did go from there's no way this is possible to I don't know, I think this is interesting now, was when Phoenix turned that dollar into three quarters in that trade and said, we have 3 first-round picks. They're not great, but we have 3 additional assets we can send out. Maybe 2 goes to one team, 1 goes to another team. And that's where it was, oh, I wonder if this is the bargaining point of I'm not waiving my no trade. We don't want to take that contract. Fine. Here's one of the first-round picks we'll give you to take that. But this, I mean, the whole way this thing is unfolded, does it make you wonder, is Jimmy Butler going to stay in Miami? Like, what is the other option? If Bradley Beal is telling Phoenix, nah, man, I'm not waiving the no trade. And that's what Mark Bartelstein said last night. There are no discussions about that with Milwaukee, Dallas, Denver, a few other teams. So if he's just sticking to his guns and saying, I am waiting for the absolute perfect move, which he has the right to do with that no trade, what happens with Jimmy Butler?
Now, I will say when it comes to agents coming out and saying, hey, this is what this is, that I'm always a bit more skeptical of, especially given this whole situation.
It's an easy way to just, hey, why wouldn't he waive his no trade? Like, what if, all right, we'll kick in this or we'll look at this. Yeah.
Right. Because even with Jimmy Butler and his agent coming out and being like, there's no truth to Jimmy wanting out of Miami. And then like the very next week or 2 weeks later, you have Jimmy saying like, I don't have any Drew on the court in Miami no more. So then it's like, oh, wait, I thought that you said your client. Nonetheless, agent talk can be agent talk. And again, about the fit with Beal in Milwaukee, it just didn't make sense. But for Jimmy, I could see a situation where this is not resolved by the trade deadline and Jimmy Butler is still a Miami Heat member and they're going to have some type of uncomfortable rest of the season. And we've mentioned it. Jimmy has no problem being in uncomfortable situations. He seems to thrive in those situations. And Pat Riley has also shown us that he's somebody who doesn't really care too much. It's like, I feel like the way I'm doing things is best for business. And we're all going to do things the way that I want it to be done. So it's a battle between 2 really stubborn personality types with Pat Riley, with Jimmy Butler. And I honestly would not be surprised if he did stay on the team. But given that the Phoenix Suns have figured out a way to get some more draft capital to be able to send out in these trades, even though those picks are probably late first rounders, all 3 of them, it's something to help sweeten the deal a little bit, some type of, trade asset to be able to throw out there for him. So I think because Phoenix made that move, I feel like something is going to happen, but I wouldn't be surprised if nothing happened. Like this Jimmy Butler situation, I just check my phone, I get a Shams alert and it's like, is it time? Is it time? And it's like, nah, not yet. Something else that's happening, but you can see Phoenix really gearing up for it. It's just, can Phoenix find enough other teams that are willing to be part of this trade to make it work, because they are going to need 3, 4, maybe 5 teams in totality along with the Heat to really pull this off. Who wants Bradley Beal's contract too? That's the other piece of the question.
Shouts to R.R. Smith. I appreciate the assistance there. I mean, not necessarily entirely my viewpoint, but I do appreciate you coming through there. So, yeah, I mean, the money aspect is the big part of it too. Look, you're probably sick of it. Fans are. I think we all are. Great. We can put this to rest. But But I do want to examine what Phoenix did as we start to wrap this up. And is that something we're going to see a lot of teams do now? Like the creative deal? Is it something the Bucks could do? Because I touched on this a little bit on yesterday's show as well. So we'll see if this is a move we could expect the Bucks to make coming up after this on Locked On Bucks. This next segment of Locked On Bucks is brought to you by Game Time. I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, comedy, wrestling. Some of my favorite memories this past year were attending those events, and more upcoming here in the next couple of weeks with my help from Game Time. Now, Game Time has made it even easier to get tickets to your favorite events with their new feature, Game Time Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so now you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Recently, I mentioned going to a comedy show in Madison next week, also going to see a Goose a week or so after that, and I went to Game Time for my tickets to both of those events. I found amazing deals, could even see the views from my seat before I bought the tickets. Super deal was particularly impressive, offering great seats at unbeatable prices, and the app's all-in pricing shows the total cost up front with no surprise fees at checkout. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem that code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA, for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. So, look, the number one thing that just never made sense from the Bucks perspective too, and I swear this is the last thing we'll say about Bradley Beal specifically, is the money. I mean, even if Bradley Beal would sign off his no trade clause or at least lift it for that trade, $53 million is what he's due next season. Then he has a player option for $57 million in the 26-27 season. The Bucks have Giannis under contract next season for $54 million. Damian Lillard under contract for $54 million. Bobby Portis has a $13 million player option. Khris Middleton has a $34 million player option. Pat Connaughton has a $9 million player option. So if all of those guys are still on your team, we're already there, Camille, talking about $160 million in salary between those three players alone. 23 million more that you're adding with Bobby Portis, Pat Connaughton, and Khris Middleton. 22 more with Bobby Portis and Pat Connaughton, but like 50 plus more with Khris Middleton. So there, you would be talking about a team. Well, I take off the Bobby Portis and Pat Connaughton part, but still, 160 million between those three players. I mean, right there, that's the salary cap next year is $180 million, I believe. The second apron level is $207 million. So you're already with just those three guys, 65, not even 45 million short of the second apron. The goal, as we said all along, was to avoid the second apron. And that's why I would expect smaller types of moves where you're sending out maybe two players for one. One of them is a bit of a larger salary, so you can get under that apron, open up a roster spot, hopefully do something with Ryan Rollins. It's not okay. Let's avoid the second apron this year and then jump right back into it next year and the next couple of years.
Yeah, it wouldn't make sense financially either, because one thing that we have been hearing that the Bucks have been looking to do, as you mentioned, is get under that second apron, and that move wouldn't allow them to do that. And even the on-court fit of like, okay, if it's Beal in for Middleton, like you're losing so much playmaking. And we've talked a lot about how important Khris Middleton's playmaking is for this team, especially with how it's constructed, because all intents and purposes, Khris Middleton is really like the Bucks backup point guard as well, and role in what he does and the way that he's able to lead those second units, the way he's able to have that connection with Giannis from all of their years of playing together, how he's able to get Giannis easy shots, how he's able to get other guys good looks. And Beal's game doesn't necessarily do that for others. I believe he averages like 4 assists for his entire career. And for Khris Middleton, you can see him do that in the half pretty quickly with this Bucks team. So All in all, again, I'm very glad that Chris Haynes came out and said like the Bucks have no interest in Bradley Beal, because it didn't make sense to me on court. It didn't make sense to me financially. It didn't make sense to me for the future of the franchise. So really happy that we can kind of put the Bradley Beal conversations behind us. I mean, we're probably going to be peeking over our shoulders a little bit until the actual trade frameworks are completely done, because we know things can change. But at this point in this juncture, it seems like that's not happening here in Milwaukee. And I couldn't listen. I know you can't necessarily say this exactly, but I couldn't be more thrilled in this moment that it seems as if the Bradley Beal to Milwaukee thing is not happening.
So yeah, about 159 million for those three players. And I totally butchered this setup there. It's been a long night, early morning, Camille, but there would be no Khris Middleton salary, Bobby Portis or Pat Connaughton in that scenario. But still, basically $160 million for just three players. You'd have to add 11 more. I would imagine, so long as he keeps performing like this, you're open to, as much as some people may not want to hear it, you're open to, hey, we'd love to have you back on a reduced rate to Brook Lopez in that discussion there. But the cap is actually 154 million next year. So the Bucks would already be over the cap
with that.
And about 45 million short of the second apron, with still, again, having to add 11 players to your roster, which is basically saying we're taking on 11 veteran minimum contracts if that's the case. But I mentioned it did spark some interest in one thing about that trade, and that was the Suns turning their 2031 first into 3 first-round picks. And again, they're not good first-round picks, but it's still a first-round pick, which, I mean, it's like the job that you put on a resume. Hey, I didn't do much there, but that company is on my resume, so it looks good. It's still we have 3 picks. We can throw in 2 in this deal, but more importantly, too, Camille, is it allows you to prevent breaking the stepping rule, where now you have picks back and can say, okay, we'll keep the terrible pick, our pick the year after that or the year before that, since we're no longer back-to-back years without a pick, we can move that. We'll throw that in. Like, that was the more interesting part to me, is do we see the Bucks say, what about our 2031 unprotected? We'll use that, and a contract that we're looking to get out of that could maybe get us under the second apron. We'll send it off to a team, and they give us 2 first-round picks back in exchange. I know there's going to be, and I'm curious your thoughts, a large portion of fans that are saying, no, that 2031
too valuable.
The reality is nobody on this team is on this team in 2031 or in 2030, when your record would matter for that 2031 pick. I get that. We saw Steph Curry basically come out and tell the Warriors that same message. I also have a hard time moving away from, look, you still got Giannis. The loyalty that this guy has shown you, and saying, I'll stay with Milwaukee as long as you keep your end of the bargain and you make us competitive. It's hard for me to not use literally every asset I have, so long as he's here, to say, okay, there are going to be some lean years when Giannis is gone, when this whole crew is gone. There's going to be some lean years that we're going to have to adjust to, but we have to do everything we can to do that. And I think that kind of opened more eyes to creativity of, oh, maybe we should look at that, where you take your one asset and just like the analogy used with the Suns, I mean, you took $1 and turned it into 3 quarters. Make no mistake, that's what you would be doing. But if that's the cost to get you under the second apron, to allow you to retain a guy like Ryan Rollins and maybe do something else, like we talked about the other day, there's reports out there, if the Raptors can't find a trade partner for Bruce Brown, they'll buy him out. As of this moment, you couldn't sign him because of a second apron team. But if that happens and you get under that second apron, you could. So it just made me wonder we've seen John Horst make some pretty creative deals in the past. Like, maybe this was already on their radar, but I wonder if it is even more so now.
I feel like this new CBA is going to cause a lot of teams to have to do some really unique things when it comes to how they acquire more assets, how they complete these trades. I mean, we saw a little bit of it even when the Knicks got Karl-Anthony Towns, and just somehow they just wiggled around a few things there to make sure that trade could happen for him. And I loved hearing Steph Curry come out and say, like, hey, I don't want our franchise to make any moves that could be seen as desperate, anything that can really compromise what we have going on in the future, because we have to be stewards of the franchise. You don't tend to hear players come out and say things like that. I'm used to the LeBron route of F them picks, get me some help now. I'm trying to compete. And I think too, for Steph Curry, he's 36, 37 years old. So he understands I'm getting closer to the end than I am to the beginning. I love this franchise. But for Giannis here in Milwaukee, he's 30. Like, there is still some years ahead of him to try to really go out there and get this. So I could see the Bucks being a little bit more aggressive with their assets than what you would see the Warriors being at this time, just because of where their superstar is in their current career form, like where they are. And John Horst probably did see that and be like, that's something to consider, because this is a Bucks team where their window is open. We went into this season and I said, this is going to be a really big year, I think, for this Milwaukee Bucks team, because they've had 2 straight seasons of losing in the first round of the playoffs. They've been doing these moves of trying to stay competitive, trying to be in the race for the big championship at the end. But they've had some unfortunate health luck. So this season felt like, to me, one of the last ones of like, we're going to run this back again. Try to make some changes around the margins and see if we can compete. But like, for this core, like, hey, we're getting close to, this is the final dance unless you show us that this can continue to work. So I think it's on the table for the Bucks to be looking to, trade in assets, trade that 31 pick to get more assets, to be able to move around a little bit more, being able to, do more pick swaps, being able to unlock other draft picks. So I do think that's something that's on the table for this Bucks team going forward, given where Giannis is in his career. And like you mentioned, and Bucks fans know, Giannis has said time and time again, as long as I feel we're in a position to compete, I am fine with being in Milwaukee. So it's John Horst's job. He has a lot of things to do in his job, but a main one is to make sure that, they are still in line to compete, so that their superstar franchise player, homegrown superstar franchise player, continues to want to be here.
Yeah. We are now 2 weeks to the day away from the trade deadline. So we're going to start to hear more and more the Bucks being linked to teams. The Bucks inquired about this player. Like, you're going to start to hear more and more of that. But apparently out on Bradley Beal, which been viewed almost unanimously as good news by Bucks fans here. The game still scheduled to take place tonight, as far as we know. So if that does change, I don't anticipate we would hear anything until around 2:00 ish. Like, if they're delayed in getting out, or it's pushed back even later, I mean, there has to be like a 5:00 is the drop dead. No, if we're not arriving by that, this just can't happen. And even 5, it's crazy, Camille. A 4:00 arrival is 2.5 hours before the game.
That's nuts.
It's scheduled to be played tonight. It may not and likely will not be pretty basketball, but we think we're getting it tonight between the Bucks and the Miami Heat. No Jimmy Butler, who is serving his 2-game suspension now. So we won't even have that to look forward to for rivalries week tonight. God, can you imagine too, if it's all right, the game isn't postponed, but Jimmy Butler suspended and the Bucks are just submitting an injury report. It's like, yeah, we just arrived 2 hours ago. We're not playing Giannis. We're not playing Dame. We're not playing this guy.
And at that point, TNT would probably be like, well, we probably should have went down there to Atlanta and got this. Who was it? Atlanta and Pelicans?
Atlanta and Toronto. Yeah.
There you go.
And you got the Pacers playing later on today, too, is the Paris games. So it's multiple games being played in Paris now. That's the other thing to keep an eye on as we wrap here is, look, if the Pacers lose to the Spurs, the Bucks are suddenly at least 3 games up in the loss column on all of those teams behind them, on the Pacers, the Pistons, the Hawks, the Magic, the Heat, the Bulls, the Sixers. You're already 8 up in the loss column on. So 10, I beg your pardon. So if Pacers lose this, we're starting to get to that point in the schedule where keep an eye on the loss column. And Indiana's been playing terrific of late as well. So as of this moment, we'll have a post-game show tomorrow for the show and recapping the Bucks and Miami Heat game that we do think is being played tonight at Fiserv Forum. That'll do it for today's show. For Camille, I'm Justin. We will talk to you guys once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.